Now, I want to read you a quote because I know probably a lot of you have heard of the book Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. And probably many of you have read it. And I think I already told my story about being in a book club with people that had attempted to read Think and Grow Rich. But in Think and Grow Rich, Napoleon Hill says, an educated person is not necessarily one who has an abundant or general or specialized knowledge. An educated person is one who has so developed the faculties of their minds that they may acquire anything they want or its equivalent without violating the rights of others. Now, see, we can be highly educated. We can have a lot of information going around in our conscious mind because all our education is in our conscious mind. And we've talked about the conscious and subconscious mind in a previous episode. I would suggest you go back and watch those because there are differences. But in our conscious mind, we can have all this information stored up there that we've been taught. And it can be general knowledge or it can be specialized knowledge. And that will only take you so far. You know, have you ever seen people that are highly intelligent people? And maybe they were the straight A students in school. Maybe they're their PhD candidates or, you know, have their PhD. They're just highly educated with one degree after another. And yet they are living completely average, sometimes even mediocre lives. Because even though they are highly intelligent, they have never been able to develop these 6 intellectual faculties in their mind. One of my mentors was telling a story that he went to a conference, which he was asked to come present on and talk about the mind and how it works. And these were all educators. And I, being a former educator, I would have fallen into this exact group. But he asked these educators, do any of you know what the 6 intellectual faculties are? And these educators had no idea what he was talking about. Well, I didn't either until I was taught them, because as an educator, I was never schooled in what the 6 intellectual faculties are. And in fact, one of the most important one, as far as achieving your success that you want in life, one of the most important intellectual faculties is imagination. And yet, maybe you were a victim of this when you were in school. Maybe you know somebody was a victim of this, but how many teachers have you ever heard that said, Johnny, you need to be paying attention. Mary, put that away and pay attention to me. Or Susie, would you get back down here and listen to me? And you see, every time a child hears that, either in a school setting or maybe a parent is saying, you know, get off of cloud 9 or whatever. And every time you hear that, you think it's wrong to be in your imagination. Well, after I learned these 6 intellectual faculties, I was still teaching school. And I remember one day, just one of the nicest students I had, he was just staring, just totally not paying attention to anything I was teaching. And so I was not one to really ever say things like that to kids, because I learned early on in my teaching career that the best way to get a child to pay attention if they weren't listening, rather than saying something, because when you say something as a teacher, you're interrupting the whole flow of the class and whole flow of what you may be explaining. And so the best thing to do was to just move towards that child. And 9 times out of 10, or maybe even 99% of the time, that stops whatever was happening. So I used that technique and I went over towards this young man and I got really close. And it was so funny because the other kids that were sitting around him were kind of smiling because they could see the exact same thing I was seeing, that he was just in his imagination and not paying any attention. And as I moved closer to him, it had 0 effect on him. And I knew, you know, he was a really good child, so he was not trying to like totally ignore me. And so I kept moving closer and closer until I was right in front of him. And it didn't even matter. It was like I was totally invisible. And finally, I just kind of leaned down as quietly as I could say it. And I'm sure that the children around him heard me, but as quietly as I could say, as I said, and I'll just say Johnny, because that wasn't his name, but I said, Johnny, I don't know where you are, but it must be really beautiful. But could you just come back with me just for a little bit? Now, what did I do there? You see, in that instance, I didn't tell him, you should be paying attention to me because I am far more important than your imagination. No, that's not what I said at all. I acknowledged that his imagination was super important. I just needed him to come back just for now. But it wasn't that he couldn't go back to his imagination. I remember my one daughter, when she was little, it was our oldest daughter. So she would, come up with these crazy games. We'd be at the beach and she'd, invent these strange games with these strange rules, and she'd change it, and just very, very creative. And she was making it up, and often she was making it up as she went, and she was using her imagination, which was a beautiful thing. You see, the imagination is how you're going to achieve your dreams and your goals. It's not going to be by following some rule or looking at even an affirmation. It's going to be building that beautiful picture, just like my student had done, building that beautiful picture in your mind, and then creating that image that